Thank you, Lloyd. My name is Paige Medill, and today I'm thrilled to be speaking with Logan about the Constitutional Convention. Before we discuss the convention, would you be able to tell me a little bit about your background and what motivated you to represent your community as a delegate?
Yeah, I think the main thing is I've been a community member for a long time. And my startup builds DAO infrastructure and community management software for projects that use Cardano as their root of trust. And in this age of Voltaire, I think one thing that separates Cardano from any other blockchain ecosystem is how much we're leaning into governance. And in order to have good decentralized governance, you need to have people participate. Um, People from I didn't think 3 years ago would I have thought I would have been wanting to be a delegate and go into a constitutional workshop. No, but I felt a call to action just from being in the community so long and building technology in the on the Cardano blockchain. I felt a calling to dive into governance and see how I can help shape things and how I can help represent the entrepreneurs and the delegates from or the people from the Austin Constitutional Workshop as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's so great to meet you. I'm sure it's going to be hard, but if you were able to pick a most memorable moment from the convention, would you be able to? And how would you say that it shaped your understanding, if it did, of collaborative governance?
Yeah, I think my it's hard to single out one moment, but in terms of like a collection of moments that came to one kind of thing is the temperature check memes. And I know we might talk about this a little more as we keep chatting, but there was all these temperature checks, and it was you were hearing a lot of opinions, a lot of voices, and in order to move on to the next topic, you'd have to get a consensus from the room. So there was constantly checks to see, okay, are we good with how this is written? Do we need to keep talking about it more? And people would say yes or no as a group. So overall, like the temperature check memes became pretty funny, but at the same time, the temperature checks were necessary in order to have all these collaborative voices come together because it was messy. You got different opinions saying different things, and to come to consensus is not an easy thing to do when you're trying to create a constitution that you want to last generations. I also really enjoyed the wine bar night. It wasn't really an official event, but I know Chris from Catalyst, he invited a bunch of people to this wine bar in Buenos Aires, and it was a good time. I think I got to meet some new friends in the ecosystem, and everyone let loose a little bit. So those are probably my two biggest ones.
I love that. That sounds like so much fun. During the convention, delegates achieved, I would say, remarkable consensus on multiple issues. Would you be able to share a specific instance where you saw all of these diverse perspectives come together effectively?
Yeah, and honestly, this started long before the Constitutional Convention. So there was all these different workshops. So I remember being in the Austin, Texas workshop, and we were talking about the term limits for the Constitutional Committee, and people were throwing out numbers, and there was other opinions in the room, including myself, that was like, we don't need term limits in the Constitution. We just need to have something in the Constitution where it outlines the process to elect and assign term limits. We don't need to have it, hard coded in the Constitution and need an amendment to change it and have a fluid way like that. And then those opinions were heard, kind of changed the opinion of the room. And then by the time we got to the Constitutional Convention, that's how it was written. Um, and there's tons of examples of people coming together to discuss the Constitution. I mean, at the convention we went line by line. So I think you can think of syntax and diction of a lot of different parts of the Constitution that were debated upon. I remember there was a debate between like whether you use equitably, equity, like equal, and just little things like that. They may seem little, but they are important in the grand scheme of things because this is the document that the Constitutional Committee will use to determine whether a governance action is constitutional or not. So, yeah, I mean, there was tons of diverse perspectives, and eventually, throughout the long hours of going through the Constitution, we kind of saw a combination of all these different perspectives come together.
How did you manage to maintain active communication with your constituent community throughout the convention? Because I'm sure there were so many people and so many conversations going on all at once. What insights did they in particular provide?
Yeah, I remember while we wrapped up the Austin Constitution and people knew like me and Pseudo, which is my delegate that I was an alternate to, they voiced like their biggest concerns to us. So we wrote those down, we kept them in mind. And we also actually used the Clarity tool. We had like this governance action where people could come in and submit edits they would want to the Constitution. And there was even another tool that the community made so that people could come in and tell their delegates what their issues were or what things they would like to see discussed or whatever. So that's how we stayed in touch with our delegates for the most part. What insights did they provide? A lot of them. I mean, they wanted a different preamble. They weren't sure about the framing notes. They had thoughts on all the tenets. So really, it was just like a super collaborative effort to edit a document. And obviously, everyone has their opinions, just like everyone has, hands. And it's a lot of opinions in the room. But we tried to boil it down to make sure that we discussed the most important things to our constituents.
Absolutely, absolutely. Coming back to temperature checks, actually, the convention implemented a number of consensus building techniques. How would you say that these methods influenced the quality of discussion and the decision making?
Yeah. Yeah, I brought up the temperature checks earlier,
Mm.
and it became a bit of a meme because there was so many different things to get through. Because this document, every sentence has to be thought about, and so you'd read a section, and then you'd have a temperature check, and then if there was something within that section that people wanted to change, you'd have a temperature check about that, and eventually you got to this document that was constantly being temperature checked, and every different section of it was being temperature checked. um, these methods influence the quality of discussion because you know one thing that I think the delegates and alternates and people that are part of the Constitution realize is that everyone's not going to be 100% happy, and that's how it should be. It's not going to be a perfect document where you agree with absolutely everything, especially when you have this many diverse perspectives. So the temperature checks were effective in making sure that most of the constituents were happy to move forward to the next section or next sentence or whatever it was, and people were able to voice their opinions about the specific topic being discussed, and then there was a temperature check on it. So I thought it created, really in my head, one of the only ways you could even get through it with that amount of voices in the room.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Looking back at the process, what would you say surprised you most about working with delegates from many different cultural and geographic backgrounds?
Yeah, I think it really set in for me, as you walked into the Constitutional Convention and you saw all the different flags in the room. Um, it kind of made me reflect and be like, wow, this is really a global thing that we're a part of. We're definitely, you got the feeling that you were part of something bigger than yourself. And I think that's a good place to be as a human, to have a bigger mission that other people are trying to accomplish with you, which is really cool. So, I think it covered 6 different continents, so many different countries. And, when you met someone, you didn't know where in the world they were going to be from. And then you had another whole side event in Nairobi where there was even more cultures present. Um, so yeah, I thought it was really cool to see how from every corner of the world people see the potential in Cardano and in blockchain to be a superior source of truth and the home of a global free market where privacy and transparency is maintained. Um, so I'm really excited to just know that it's not just me that thinks this is cool. It's people from every corner of the world. It's not just a few fringe Americans that like really want to see decentralized governance and decentralized finance in the mainstream. It's people all around the world are experiencing these similar problems with legacy ways of doing things. So yeah, I would say what most surprised me is just I guess I wasn't so much surprised as how the truth just kind of set in, that this is a global community.
That's really beautiful, and I think that's why I love this community so much, how global it really is. Would you be able to describe a challenge that you encountered during the convention and how you worked with other delegates to overcome it, if any?
Yeah, one challenge I had was how to try to get my version of the preamble communicated and considered. And I don't think it really happened, but I just got over it because the preamble there was pretty solid. I thought it encompassed most of what I wanted it to do. I mean, I wanted the preamble to be like a short, punchy thing where, after a random person reads it, they're like, "Well, I want to be a part of that." Um, but yeah, like I said, there was no actual solution aside from me being like, okay, my wishes aren't going to be totally granted here, but I think what we have in place is very solid. Um, so yeah, that would be my answer to that one.
Yeah, good answer. What aspect, if you could pick one, of the final constitution makes you particularly proud? And what about it makes you believe that it'll benefit the broader community?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the tenets, and the reason is I believe they'll serve as great principles that will set the direction of the ecosystem for generations to come. I think they're very well thought out. I think that they make a lot of sense for what the purpose and vision of Cardano is. So I'll go with the tenets because I think they'll be really good guiding principles for the ecosystem for a long time.
Absolutely, absolutely. How has your experience as a delegate influenced your perspective as a global collaboration in governments?
Oh
Big
man,
question.
yeah, I think for me, what I realized from this experience is that governance is really hard. And if you have a ton of voices, it's hard to come to consensus, and this is why you have votes. This is why you have thresholds you have to meet, because seldom is there situations where everyone agrees. In fact, most of the time, people sharply disagree. Um, but I think while I realized and learned that it's extremely difficult. I think I knew it was difficult before it, but it was even more obvious as we went through the convention. Um, I think that having in-person events really helps benefit governance. So if you have a lot of stakeholders within an ecosystem, getting everyone together is very beneficial. So I think that's really cool and something to note. And yeah, governance is messy. Governance is hard, but at the end of the day, governance is broken in legacy systems. Like whether we look at the governments and wasteful spending that's happening in the United States, or we're looking at corruption and rigged elections in other countries, or we're looking at flawed monetary policy that's creating hyperinflation. Governance is messed up. You could talk about the insurance industry. You could talk about Wall Street, probably in a lot of instances with governance. So yeah, governance is messed up, and blockchain is really a governance technology at its core. It creates a superior source of truth that everyone in the world can see. And once technologies like midnight and things like that come to life. You'll also be able to preserve your privacy. Um, so yeah, governance is messy, but blockchain creates hope for better governance around the world.
I love that. Very well said. As we look into the future, final question, what advice would you give to other communities that are considering similar governance initiatives?
Yeah, I would say make sure you have people that care before you try to do anything with decentralized governance. I think I work with DAOs pretty much all day, every day, and before you implement like on-chain decentralized governance, the one thing you need is you could call it product market fit, or you could call it at least 10 people in your community that will actually care and vote and tell other people and that type of stuff. I think that's kind of a good threshold for it, but that's not to say that you can't build to that by implementing decentralized operations and getting people used to thinking and operating in that way, whether it's having crowdsourcing ideas from your community via like a temp check or a governance action, or it's having people learn more about your entity and get points for it and then get rewards. So my as people look at, implementing governance on a community scale, I think first, you can gamify the process of being a part of your organization in order to get people to learn more and to get people more interested. And then once you really get that core group of community members, you can flip on the switch and give the community more control. So yeah, that's what I think about that one.
I think you're very right. Logan, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. I really appreciate it. This has been incredibly insightful for me, and I'm sure it will be for the wider community as well. Um, Thank you so much for your insight on the convention. It's so great getting different perspectives on this really amazing event.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, and glad I could share some stuff about the convention and governance with everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was my pleasure. For GM Cardano, I am Paige Padil.